I think everything we are and everything we possess is in reference to our acknowledgement of its presence. Um, I think when it comes to ourselves and comes to, I guess, growth and change as people, it's not necessarily the effort that we put in that generates the change, but our acceptance that the effort actually has made a change that makes it. I think it's not about running from who you were previously, but recognizing that that's no longer here. And what that means to me is recognizing that the choice is in the present moment. And I think who we are in a lot of ways is just in reference to what we become addicted to, or more so, what we become familiar to when it comes to our expression. And I think when it, boils down to that expression, we sort of need to give ourselves an opportunity to change in ways that we want, you know. And I think that takes us sometimes saying no to our previous self in terms of previous thoughts and previous expressions that don't necessarily benefit us. Recently I've been recognizing in my procrastination with certain things and in my inaction with other things that sometimes we're tied to the past in ways that seem subtle, or they seem like they're not that big of a deal, or this is that and the other, and I don't think they should be treated as a big deal. What I'm saying is sometimes we have thoughts that align with previous versions, and I think those thoughts are often comforting. Those thoughts are often, oh, let me not do this. You should just do this because this is what you're used to. But it's not gonna always frame itself in that because you're used to it. It's just gonna tell yourself that's what you want in the moment. And I think it's in those moments that we have to truly ask ourselves whether or not this action, this thought, this perspective that I'm giving myself is actually going to tend me towards where I actually want to go in life. And I think that's part of what allows certain discipline to be taking place in the moment is our ability to not reference ourselves constantly to who we were in the past, but establish something new by being present enough to choose our actions. And I think it's in those present choosings that we actually obtain some sort of acknowledgement for ourselves in any type of goal we're trying to achieve. Not in essence of saying it's necessary to do a bunch of stuff and act in order to uh, believe, but to say it's much easier to believe in who you are if you act in accordance to that belief. And what that means to me is actually doing the things that you want to do because you want to do them, and actually not doing the things you don't want to do because you don't want to do them. I think it's about being firm in our decision to be ourselves and making sure we're making a decision on who that self is. And I think it's pretty easy to think that you have no choice in the matter. I think it's pretty easy to think that who we are is exactly how it's going to be, and it's going to stay like this forever, and whoever our parents told us we were, whoever society or friends or whatever told us we were, we are, and we're not. That's who we've accepted ourselves to be based on that. That's who we've believed ourselves to be based off of other people's opinions and perspectives. And even if they were correct at a time, that doesn't mean that you can't change. It doesn't mean that you can't turn into something entirely new. I revisited earlier today when I was writing the idea that you can't use old bricks to build a new house. I always thought the idea of renovation was much more captivating in the sense of that, in a sense saying, when you do lose bricks, when you do come to collapse, it's not about going out and buying new bricks. It's about repainting and refurbishing what you currently have to align with what you need. And I think sometimes things fall down in order to allow us to make more space for ourselves. And I think sometimes that's necessary. I think when we attach our identity to certain small expressions, certain small window of what we're actually able to do, we lose our ability to do what's new. We lose our ability to sort of break out of the box that is us. And I think in a lot of ways we have to get out of our own way. And I think you have to get out of your way to see the way, you know? And it's not even about the vision that we have for our path, but our recognition that it's not the acknowledgement of the path that's going to get you to walk it any faster. It's your acknowledgement of self. We have to recognize that us and the path are not necessarily two different things. Your path to self is also your path to whatever it is that you want to do in this life, because as capable as you feel you are, as much as you fill yourself up, that's as much as you're going to feel deserving, one, or capable to actually achieve what you want. And then in the present moment, when we see opportunities, or if we're willing to, we can create them ourselves. I think a lot of what we're convincing the self to be is just repetitive. It's just what we're used to when it comes to ourselves and what we're used to in terms of our expression in the world around us. I'm recognizing that when things are unknown, that's what's new. That's what creates your new future. That's what creates your new life. And I don't think things even have to look different in a sense. You just have to look at them different in a sense. You may wake up in the same house every day. You may look in the same mirror, have the same hairstyle, have the same this, have the same that. But since when are our gratitudes lived in reference to each other? And since when should we dampen our gratitude for something based on its familiarity? I think these are two conditions we've primed ourselves to do based on how readily we consume everything else. How we don't establish with ourselves that appreciation can last much longer than its first instantiation. If you thank somebody for helping, you don't just feel that gratitude in that one moment. You thank them for the rest of your life. Each and everything that helps us build who we are and helps us be who we are is worth our appreciation. And I think it's about carrying that appreciation with you, not allowing everything to dissipate with a moment. If you're so ready to carry negativity, if we're so primed to carry our negativity with us, then we should be able to do the same with the positive aspects of our life and positive aspects of who we are. I think it is always about what you give to yourself and learning to give to yourself without expectation, because it's not about what you receive from yourself, but who you are, but the person receiving it. And I think that's the true beauty. I think if we're able to affirm ourselves to a certain degree, then anything will be able to bring us a certain amount of positivity that we receive, because it won't be about the overall value of that something, because our value will be inherent to who we are. And that doesn't mean we won't like the gift. It means we will like it. But we won't like it in reference to our own value. We'll like it in reference to our own feeling, in reference to who we are. And I think that's why the more genuine pursuits of self and genuine things that we're attributed are always through our authenticity, through our ability to sort of be firm in who we are, but not necessarily hard with the world, if that makes sense. I think sometimes when we're getting into a period of like development, sometimes we develop the ego more than we do our actual self. And what that looks like to me is, sort of playing defense from the world, feeling like you need to jump through a lot of hoops in order to love yourself or appreciate who you are, or recognizing that you need to accept yourself. I think that acceptance of the self and the ego sort of go hand in hand in terms of actually being able to combat your ego or to be able to use it to your benefit. I think everyone has the ego. There's no such thing as getting rid of it. If someone says, I got rid of an ego, who is telling you? All that to say that I think it's important to recognize that the ego doesn't have to be a bad thing. And our identification with ourselves doesn't have to be negative either. And I think it's really just about what we carry, And I'm recognizing that we need to learn how to not necessarily carry everything we see with us in a way. Everything we see in terms of all our material wealth, all of, the thoughts and opinions of others. I think we really need to ground ourselves in our own perspective of who we are, not necessarily in a sense of narcissism or a sense of ignorance, but in a sense of true honesty. I think when we commit ourselves to being better people and in opening ourselves to who we actually are, we're actually permitted an opportunity to change part of it. I think you can't hear what you don't acknowledge. And some of us need to start treating life with a certain amount of beauty that it deserves. A certain amount of acceptance, a certain amount of relaxation into the moment. There's no obligation for you when it comes to expressing who you are. You don't have to lie to people. You don't have to lie to yourself. I think establishing that who you are is already sufficient is one of the easiest ways to start building. Because once you see your foundation, that you actually start getting ideas on what to build on top of it. And I think once looking at your foundation, you can also see the parts where you need more affirmation, more validation to actually allow things to stand on top of you more easily. But I think none of that is going to be seen if we're constantly worried about how our house looks before we even set down foundation. I think a lot of us paint our house with a beautiful exterior, but inside we have so many support beams and props that hang up our identity. And what I've recognized is it's not necessarily saying we shouldn't be supported by others, but to say we should be supported by ourselves. I think that's what affirms us as people, is the support that we give to ourselves. You may have times where you need support from others, but I'm not talking about specific instances and circumstances where you're brought down. I'm talking about instances and circumstances when we're brought down ourselves by our dependence on other people and other things to show us our worth and value. You know, I think we all have a value much greater than we care to express to ourselves, that we could ever truly give to ourselves. And I think sometimes we need to recognize how small we are in a grand scheme of everything, and I think that's the true humility in the moment. Not necessarily saying to yourself that you're insignificant, that you have no purpose, that you have no this, that you have no that, but recognizing that everyone does. And if everyone does, then your objective isn't to worry about other people's purposes and perspectives and journeys. It's to focus on your own and take your own steps. We're all inspired by each other in a lot of ways, and I love the way I'm inspired by everyone else. And I was realizing this the other day. I see so many eloquent speakers, writers, etc., and I'm like, wow, it's truly beautiful to be able to see somebody do something like that. And then I let it go in a way. I think sometimes we obsess over certain people's capabilities because we think we're incapable. And I don't mean that to say we shouldn't show appreciation for people's greatness. I think we should. But I think we need to give ourselves some, so even when we do see things that, I don't know, may not align, we can still appreciate it without reference to ourselves. Like, in my own experience, I think when I wasn't trying to give myself any value for who I was, when I would see other people doing certain things, you get a little sense of envy, and I think it's not even about being careful with what you say, quote unquote, or rehearsing what you say to such a dangerous degree. I think it's really just about letting yourself be yourself. We're already sharing a lot with the world. And what that means to me is when we are talking about ourselves or our experience or expressing ourselves in some sort of creative outlet, platform, or art, or it's in essence of just being us, it shouldn't have a reference point. I don't think it even should be connoted as good or bad. I think we need to give ourselves a true amount of audience and give ourselves applause, cheer for ourselves, laugh at our own humor in a lot of ways. Because our sufficiency is only in reference to how sufficient we feel, not how others may point at you and label you. It's about how you label yourself. It's not about what contains you, but what you contain within yourself that truly limits us. I think it's always the thoughts that we have about ourselves subtly, and sometimes they go unacknowledged. I think it's important to be present also so we can be able to see those thoughts that we may have about ourselves that are limiting. Ideas about ourselves that may not actually serve who we are or where we want to go as people. And overall, give ourselves a chance to express without expectation of perfection. I think it's that truly allows me to talk in a way of just continuous yap in a way. And I think a lot of people who express themselves in any creative way or express themselves in general recognize that the ease of expression is not in its thought about it. Like, who we are is more easily expressed than it is thought. A lot of times we preoccupy ourselves with how exactly we need to be in order to be accepted in this setting, without recognizing that thinking that we need to be a different way than what we are is already us not accepting ourselves. All that to say, acceptance of yourself is something we can give to ourselves without condition. And the same goes with the love we have for ourselves and the love we can give to the moment. It's never been about how things look. It's always been about how we look at them. All in all, I hope you guys are taking care of yourself, doing what you can with what you have. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you are doing good. I hope you're treating yourself like a friend. Probably gonna stream soon. A lot on the way, a lot already here. And